to the animals under the table. System bloodthirsty dogs, red iron angles, uninspiring outlaws, creating ructions with their whispering walls. We go circle sending back trumpets and watch it fall while y'all committing crimes to extermination. With genocide, dirty water radiation, prison colony and serving with tax inches. We better get out of the way, the father's done with you. We better go. Benjamin, know my son. When you touch them, you touch me. Say, I will call and I will call you by name. Let my people go. Swing, 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 swing. Low swing, check, get caught, take me home, cause I've been in exile from Apple to Rome, and it's been so long since I see my land, so come save your sheep with your mighty hand as the orange croaked in the dark of night, mister. Time has come to see the sun's light, while some fight for wealth, we fight for liberty, so to overcome the world is gonna take you and me to bring forth the kingdom, which is our ultimate goal. That's why we're telling Pharaoh to let our people go. Let our people go. Let our people go. Swing go. Go. Let our people go. 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 Let our people go. Swing low, chariots and lead on. Swing low, chariots and lead on.
Hallelujah. We're going to open with prayer with the Hatzi Kaddish. So with that, Yit Gadal Vayit Kadesh Shemei Rabbah. Amen. V'yamadi barakerote v'yimelech malchute. V'chayichunu v'yamichunu v'chayedu kol beit Yisrael bagalav v'zman kari v'yimeru. Amen. Yehesh Shemei Rabbah Mavorach le'olam ul me'almaya. Yit barak v'yistabach v'yipa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh. V'yitadar v'yitadar v'lit Shemei d'kudesha berechu. V'yela min kol barachata v'ashirata tush bechata v'nechvata. Damiran ba'alma v'yimeru. Amen. Magnified and sanctified may his great name be in the world he created by his will. May he establish his kingdom in your lifetime and in your days and in the lifetime of all the house of Israel, swiftly and soon. And let us say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever and all time. Blessed and praised, esteemed and exalted, raised and honored, uplifted and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, beyond any blessing, song, praise, and consolation uttered in the world. And let us say Amen. Hallelujah. Want to welcome each and every one of you all to Hebrew Vision Live this evening. I'm your host, Mikael Korbanyahu, a.k.a. the End Time Scribe. We have a very dynamic show that we're going to get into very shortly. But first, as usual, I want to just let you all know you have heard the sounds of Let My People Go by Nakia Bat Yahuda featuring Yaleach Bat Yisrael, Nehemiah Yasharun, and Mikael Korbanyahu. And so tonight's show, as I go ahead and get our speaker, our featured interview on the phone, we have a show entitled Educate, Elevate, and Liberate. And we are with Sister Joanna Farmer.
Yes, sir. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you this evening?
I'm well, blessed. Always
Hallelujah.
blessed by the Most High.
Amen, amen. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to set you up like this here so people can hear you and I can see you. If I can get it going. And so we're calling the show again, Educate, Elevate, Liberate. And I believe that those are very great characteristics that pretty much can sum up what your activism is all about. As relates to our struggle and our plight as an African people in this diaspora. And so I would just ask first and foremost, just, give the people a background as to who Joanna Farmer is. I believe that it's always essential for people to know who it is that they're, tuning into. So just give us a background, where you're from and all that good stuff.
I will start by Chicago and raised on the west side of Chicago. And being from Chicago, I always feel that it gave me a unique perspective on life, no matter where I was in the country, because I was surrounded by diversity and learned a lot about how to get along with different people of all different cultures and ethnicities and genders and ages. And so being in the academic environment, being in the community, that all helped prepare me for the work that I do today.
Okay.
And basically, growing up, I was really blessed because my parents were able to afford, they could afford to send us to Catholic school. And the public schools were very bad. And so that was a good thing because we received an excellent education, my sister, my brother, and I.
Okay.
And so throughout elementary school and high school and then college, I spent my life in Chicago. And that was also good because I was able to benefit from my parents. I grew up in a two-parent household, and my parents were very structured, but also very flexible in terms of making sure that we had the kind of discipline that we had in our homes. For example, we couldn't just watch television. There was only one television in our home, and we had to ask for permission to watch television. And another thing was that we faithfully had meals together.
Okay.
So, for example, we would either have breakfast with one of our parents, and definitely we would all sit down and have dinner together. And then we went to church on Sundays. So that was another very family-focused time. And coming back home, we would have the big Sunday dinner. So there were a lot of things I would think about now in my life where I know that I was being prepared because I didn't even know when I was growing up that not everyone had those kinds of benefits. I didn't even realize there were advantages until I got much older and I started doing the work that I do because I was in an environment where I was being nurtured. And I'm fortunate also because on my mother's side of the family, there are 15 siblings, and on my father's side, 14.
Okay.
So I ended up with a wealth of aunties and uncles, as well as first cousins. And when I was growing up, your first cousins were your best friends. If you even said you wanted to go play with someone, they would say, "Where's your first cousin?" They would call them by their name. And so just that whole family ecosystem that I had really laid and provided a very solid foundation for me and made sure that I'm more resilient, basically.
Okay. And so, with that upbringing and your parents, what were their backgrounds professionally? What was it that they were engaged in professionally?
My mother, she basically was working class. She had jobs as a cashier, and she worked in the hospitality industry.
Okay.
And then my father, he wanted to go to law school, so he had completed community college, was planning to complete his bachelor's degree, and he worked at several different jobs. He was a presser, which basically meant that he worked in a dry cleaners. Okay. And then he also worked at the Chicago Transportation Authority and continued to progress there until he became what's called a towerman. Okay. Meant that he oversaw the trains and make sure everything ran correctly.
My goodness. Okay, so
I'm
sorry. Go ahead.
The other great thing about my parents is that they were very involved in the community. So, for example, my mother, she tutored at the school. She would be in our classroom. My father, he block club captain, worked in the precinct, and also was very active at our schools. He was on the school board. He was a church usher. And so both of them played their role in terms of being leadership in the community. They also, especially my mother, she would really take up a lot of time with the children in the neighborhood and just make sure that everybody had what they needed. She was one of those mothers that if her children had a bologna sandwich, everybody should have a bologna sandwich.
Right. And so is that what rubbed off? I'm sure their hard work and their work ethic, and then, you know, seeing what they were doing in the community, that rubbed off on you a lot, I would say, right?
Yes, because when you grew up in Chicago, and this is one of the most interesting things that when I think about my political activism, your 18th birthday, the first gift that you receive is your voter registration card.
Wow.
It's mandatory.
Right.
It's a rites of passage for you. And I was very blessed because I was basically at my father's side as just a little girl working on political campaigns. And I worked practically every single position. And by the time I was 21, I basically knew the ins and outs of the Chicago, the system. We call it the machine, you know, the daily machine.
I was just about to
and so by the time we were preparing to elect our first African-American mayor, I was very well prepared to work on that campaign.
Okay. So what was that like as far as getting the first Black Chicago mayor, you know, into office? As far as the behind the scenes work, what you saw take place, the climate of the city, you know, what was the climate of the city like, and then just when that event took place, how was that transition, you know, for the African American community particularly?
We had other candidates, but Harold Washington was someone who, because he was born and raised in Chicago, he was very in tune with Chicago and what Chicago needed. And so when he announced his candidacy, basically, it wasn't that difficult to get people to mobilize behind Harold Washington. And he was an attorney. He also was in the Congress. And so we used to joke a lot. We used to call what he said when he was speaking dictionary words. So we would actually joke and say, did you have to go use your dictionary to understand what Mr. Washington just said?
Right.
And the other thing about Harold Washington was that he was a very kind and compassionate person. And so he was very in touch with all people's needs, and he was definitely very community focused. And he demonstrated that not just in word, but also in deed. And so, like I said, it was very easy to get people to mobilize and support him. And electing him was just a source of great pride, because to see all of your work pay off and him to be the first African-American mayor of a city like Chicago was just huge. And I remember we were crying because we were just so overwhelmed that here we now have this Black mayor. And there were definitely some obstacles that he had to overcome because, of course, there were people who were solidly against him, unfortunately, due to racism. However, he was very adept at just really skilled as a politician at trying his best to build consensus and to get things moving. And I think a lot about the work that he did because around that same time I had just, I was a new mother. And so a lot of the work that he did, I just saw that as laying the foundation for what my son could have. Because my son, I just had him. And so it's very important, I think, when you just ask me that question, is there's a timeline here. Because having been in a situation where I actually witnessed an African-American mayor and a man being elected, helped me understand the ability to make progress. And sometimes we debate whether or not we really made progress, because we look at things and we say, well, we really haven't made progress because there's still all this poverty, or there's still all this racism, or there's still all this inequality. However, if I look at where we were and where we are, then I have to say qualitatively and quantitatively, what's progress? And so at that time, electing an African-American man as president of, the mayor of the city of Chicago, that was huge.
Especially at that time frame.
Right.
Now, Chicago, typically you wouldn't think of a northern city or a Midwestern city like Chicago as being so segregated and racist, but like you were talking in our conversation the other night about how Dr. King said that this is just as bad as the most southern city that you can think of. Did you experience that growing up?
Right. Dr. King, he actually lived in a West Side tenement for almost a year. And he wanted to draw attention to just the absolutely poor conditions that were in housing and in other areas of our lives. And so, yes, he did make a statement about that. And so he's another person who during that time period was really helping us understand the who would stand up and speak truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a very courageous man because he didn't have to take the risk that he took. His house was firebombed.
Right.
He endured a lot. And he could have put his family in jeopardy, and sometimes they were in jeopardy. There were a lot of risk factors with the work that he did.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people really need to remember and to think about and to honor and respect when you have a leader like that who is not just trying to be in front of the microphone, but is living their life in a way where they are truly embracing themselves as being a part of the change that we need to see.
Mm-hmm.
Because Chicago is still segregated. Chicago is hyper-segregated, which means it's intensely segregated.
Right.
And when you grow up in Chicago, I'll speak for myself, you're very aware of race because things are positioned that way.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was growing up in a little bit of a different kind of a bubble in terms of attending Catholic school, and then I attended a really prestigious school for college, you see the haves and the have-nots. And for myself, it was preparing me for my career because basically I'm one of those, I want to fight for the people who don't have what they're supposed to have. And that's what I saw in Dr. Martin Luther King or Harold Washington or just different other African Americans who really put themselves on the line basically to achieve and make some progress for us.
Okay. So let's transition a little bit because I think that's important as well. But getting into your background prior to you becoming an activist, your educational background and your experience with academia. Give us a little insight on that. Your alma mater, so on and so forth. What your major was, your degrees, and how this has contributed to your activism.
Okay, I'll be 55 in about 3 weeks, and I often think about how much I love to read. And a lot of that comes from my family. Our home was just filled with books. And I was very blessed because one of my aunts, she worked at the Johnson Publishing Company. And so she would always let us know when there were new books out.
Mm-hmm.
And my father faithfully bought these books. I even had a set of encyclopedias on Black history. So, and John H. Johnson was another person who was leading the way because
Mm-hmm.
he was providing content that was about us. And so that love for reading carried me through every single step of my academic experience because I didn't have a problem with studying. I just loved to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that kind of energy, that mindset, helped me endure times that were tough. So, for example, being in a situation where people might perceive you as being less than or inferior because of the color of your skin, that didn't really affect me the same way because I already knew that I was smart.
Right.
My parents were telling me that. I knew it because I could read and just as well as, if not better, than other people who were claiming that I was somehow inferior. And as I went through elementary and high school in the Catholic school education, well, what happened was that I was always in what we would call today gifted. And a lot of times I was doing my own work individually because I would be accelerated. And so I was blessed because by the time I got to high school, it was really easy for me to go straight into AP, advanced placement courses, because my elementary school, I was very well prepared by the time I got there. So by the time I got to college and I attended the University of Chicago, that also, even though that's a very challenging academic environment, I thrived in that environment because for me, it was, oh, wow, look at all these different things I get to learn. And then, oh, wow, look at all these different people I get to meet. So saying all of that to say that the work that I do, even as an activist in education, is because I believe that we all should have those kinds of experiences, because those experiences prepare you to be a lifelong learner. And when you love to read, when you love to learn, you expand your horizons. You see more than what's just on television. And you're thirsty, you're hungry for knowledge, and you want to know the truth. You want the facts. So I would say that because of my love for reading, I'm not easily bamboozled or distracted by things, because I'm already reading history, for example, and I would know right away that something is not true. So education is critical, it's key, and I was just very blessed to have a high standard of education all throughout my life.
Right. So as you have, matriculated through academia, you earn your bachelor's, what is it that you're starting to perceive on your landscape as far as what needs to be done, or what was your focus starting to really develop into as this is, unfolding for you?
When I was 6 years old, that was when Dr. King was assassinated, 1968. And what I most remember about that as a little girl is I couldn't go to school because there were riots.
Wow.
No one really was allowed outside. And I remember asking my mother in particular why I couldn't go to school. And she was trying to explain it to me without scaring me. And when I look back, I think about how not being able to go to school because there was something going on that I really didn't know that much about yet, because my parents were sheltering me and I didn't really understand. That one event propelled me into what I would study in college, because I just shared with you that Dr. King lived in a tenement and experienced these very poor housing conditions firsthand. My brother that was right next to me, he actually fell from a third-story porch.
Wow.
And back then, there was no housing court. There was no way to take your grievances with this landlord who had maintained a poor housing situation. There was no litigation like we have now. And most of all, there was no grief therapy. So now, in addition to experiencing the death of a very important person in the Black community, now I have the death of my brother.
Oh, wow.
As I continue to move through my life journey, I started to focus on public policy and housing. And I was very blessed once again because, especially in high school, my teachers, they were very supportive of my learning about things like this. They got it. They knew that it was a part of my healing. And so by the time I got to college, I majored in public policy studies. I tried economics, but when I saw that I got a B instead of an A, I said, no, this isn't going to work for me. Something's wrong here, but I got a B. So I still had to do some econ courses because that's a part of public policy studies, but it was just the right fit for me, it turned out, because I was able to really dig very deeply into the history of this country and how the different housing conditions that we saw then and that we see today really come about.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that experience in majoring in public policy studies also gave me access to different faculty members who were doing research projects and or writing books and or had foundation funds they were using to for different types of projects. Where as a student at the University of Chicago, it was really easy to become a part of that just because of the way the college is set up. It's very small compared to the graduate school. So as an undergrad, you have access to graduate level work. And so I was able to participate in research projects around housing. And so I ended up writing my bachelor's thesis on the Gautreaux housing decision. Mm-hmm. And basically, Gautreaux was a woman, she sued because of the public housing. And she did not see the outcome, the fruits of her labor, but that decision resulted in what we know today as Section 8.
Mm.
And so studying housing segregation, studying why we had public housing, how we got suburbs, and how schools are very closely connected to housing because of the property taxes that are paid to support schools. All of that was feeding into what my next step was, which I interned in the summer of my fourth year in college at the planning department and at Shorebank Corporation simultaneously, because I decided I didn't really know which one I wanted, so I just did both in order to figure it out.
Right.
And so there was this unfortunate incident at the planning department, which made me just say, okay, well, obviously I can't work with you all. So, and Shorebank was working out. And so when I graduated, that's where I went to Shorebank. And so that also allowed me to do what I love to do, which is I like to put research on the ground. I don't see research as being valuable if it's in a book that's on a shelf somewhere, just when it has a call number that you go and read in order to write a paper. To me, research is to be applied. And so going directly from finishing my bachelor's degree into Shorebank gave me the on-the-ground experience. So now all of these ideas, all of these theories, all of these different things I had learned working on these different research projects, I was able to put them in motion at Shorebank. So that was all preparing me. And of course, now in retrospect, I can look back and say, well, you know what, that was all preparing me. But of course, at the time, I was in the thick of things.
Right.
And so Shorebank, actually, the work that we were doing there was a part of making sure that people, indigenous community residents, had better opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a great fit for me, having suffered that kind of trauma, to be able to give back to people as well.
Was this an African American owned bank or something?
It was founded by 4 people, 2 white and 2 black, and basically they were banker activists. And they saw what was happening in the community. They started off in South Shore on the south side of Chicago, that the community was becoming very disinvested. There was redlining and panic peddling and blockbusting and white flight. And they decided to address it. So they used the bank basically to reinvest in the community.
Oh.
And that bank became the engine for the holding company. And so Shorebank was able to put programs in place that could deal with inequity. Mm-hmm. So because those 4, they were part of the Community Reinvestment Act. And that Community Reinvestment Act helped us reinforce the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Mm-hmm. And see, the Fair Housing Act was signed 7 days after Dr. King was assassinated. That was something he was working on. That would have been the jewel in the crown. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, our President Lyndon Johnson, at that time, they were still just having a lot of difficulty. So it was just very unfortunate that Dr. King did not see that come to fruition. But now that we have all of these different pieces of housing legislation to really get at some of the roots of these issues, I always think about Dr. King and the legacy that he left.
Right.
Because he lived the experience. He didn't just talk about the experience. He actually did his part by putting himself on the ground and living the experience. I still have people tell me that are elders, even in my own family, that he would be on playgrounds talking to children.
Wow.
That's just how down to earth he was.
Right. Just rooted.
And so I don't think people sometimes know that part of him, that he just really, he saw himself as one of the people. Because he was very blessed in terms of his educational opportunities as well.
Right.
And so I don't think he ever really used that as kind of a barrier like you see sometimes with people, I'm Dr. Such and Such kind of thing. Mm-hmm. He's still related to people.
Important. Very important. So I know that you're a big proponent of Amos Wilson. Can you share what, and it may be based on that, what his perspective is of education, but what do you see education's role is in the life of a people?
Okay, let me piggyback on housing with that.
Okay.
If you have a safe, healthy place to live, you can do better in school. Mm-hmm. There's supposed to be a correspondence. We do have stories now of children who are homeless and they study using a flashlight. Yeah. And get scholarships to Harvard.
Still, right, despite everything.
Yes. So, given what Dr. Wilson talked about, my favorite book to start off with is Awakening the Natural Genius of the Black Child. Mm-hmm. And what Dr. Wilson was doing was basically saying, look, we have all of these stereotypes about the inferiority of Black people, but here's the research that shows that none of that is true. Mm-hmm. And he was courageous enough to make sure that people were getting this information. So when I got my hands on it, it was very natural for me because I know already that everyone is born a genius. Right. So I'm saying to myself, well, wow, look at this. All I need to do is just apply what he's talking about. My other favorite book that's very related to Awakening the Natural Genius is Blueprint for Black Power, because he was outlining specific steps that could help us get to a place where we thrived. Mm-hmm. And I think we don't talk about that enough, about the process of thriving. We're so busy surviving, man, that we don't even realize that we're not trying to get to this other place where we need to thrive. Because when you're in it, you're in it. And you're just trying your best to survive. Right. Right. But being able to step back and detach and say, okay, why am I working so hard to survive? Where am I trying to go? Now, for me, because I had 2 children and I'm raising these 2 kids, I can see beyond surviving because I want to see them thrive. Mm-hmm. So I'm working hard to make sure they have a great environment to thrive, to flourish. Because if I got caught up in the everyday, right, just surviving, then they would pick that up, and then it's generational, right? So I'm thinking, like my parents thought, let me surround this child with books. And my father, he was just famous for giving me a book, and I had to write a book report. And guess who I passed that on to? My children.
Right, yep.
So he was helping me thrive because I was able to see outside of the environment.
Crucial.
Because he's coaching me.
Right, along the whole way, yep.
Now, let me tell you something else about my father, because I still laugh about this. My father read 4 newspapers a day. Wow. He read the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, the Wall Street Journal, and his favorite newspaper, which he said was the most important of all because it had the Black news, the Chicago Defender. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He would come home, give me an article, say, read this. And then we had to discuss it. He was making sure that I could have these kinds of discussions to develop my critical thinking skills, but he also sent me to a speed reading course so he can get me to read even more. So that's what I mean by moving beyond surviving to thriving.
Right.
Because he could have just stayed 9 to 5 type environment, come home, it's Friday, thank God it's Friday, and then complain about going to work on Monday. But he was creating an environment that allowed us to thrive.
That's crucial. That's crucial.
I hope I'm answering your questions.
What's that? Yeah, definitely.
Because I like everything that Dr. Wilson does, and I study the YouTube video so I can get a better understanding, because he was so prolific. And I think that a lot of what he was sharing with people, sometimes I feel that people weren't quite getting it then, because he shared so much. And then I always wondered about all the different people who had access to him, who were in his presence, who he directly talked to, corresponded with. What happened? Because he was sharing so much. So what happened in the in-between space between when he was doing all of that speaking and touring and lecturing and the books and everything, and then where we still found ourselves?
Right.
And I think we need to more closely evaluate those kinds of things, because we have a lot of greats who were sharing all of their vast knowledge with us. But how are we using that? And we just...
Right. And I think that you addressed that as far as research being applied. You know, I think a lot of the research that he had has not truly been applied, you know, in terms of as a method of our liberation. You know, people read it and they discuss it, but what is actually, even like with Garvey, you know, when we look at Garvey's writings, now Garvey put it to practice, but it's like, how can we apply that today? And that's why I asked that question as far as what is education's role in the life of a people, because what I know what he was saying, that it's about the survival and the continuance of a people, you know, and I think that's paramount in terms of the work that you've been doing as well, you know, how we can connect all this with the research and then the application, because that's what it comes down to. The rubber has to hit the road somewhere, you know.
To me, the fundamental purpose of education is to help you reach your highest potential. That's my bottom line. Whatever I read, if I go to an event to listen to someone speak, if I am working on my own research, if I'm working directly with children, adults, because I've taught all the way from the little itty bitties all the way up to graduate school and even beyond with senior citizens. The fundamental purpose of education is to help you reach your highest potential.
That's real.
My job as an educator is to walk alongside people in that process. The same way that people walked alongside me. And that's why I didn't even know that I was as blessed as I was until I was in environments where other people did not have this. And the way I found out was because of the work that I was doing. So I could have chosen to go off into some kind of career where I didn't have direct contact with people that were less fortunate. But my spirit was calling me into that work. And because of that, I started developing relationships with people who they were just as smart, if not more brilliant than I was. They just didn't have the pieces of paper. They had what we like to call common sense. They just didn't have access to the same resources that I had access to. They were able to do things to make a way out of no way that I might not have known, because I didn't have as much experience doing that. So they were teaching me as much as I was working with them. And that really helped me understand the purpose of education too, because sometimes I think we put education in a box, and we think that education is supposed to be from, you start off here in kindergarten and then you end up here in high school in the 12th grade, you graduate from that, then you go to, like, it's very linear. Education is not linear. Education is a very organic process. Education is always happening. There's synergy. You're constantly learning. And so that's what I mean by thriving. See, we focus so much on surviving that we just think that what we see around us, what we can touch, that's all we know. We have to look beyond that and notice if a bird flies by us. That's my distraction. My distraction is not the tweets. Those are not my distractions. That's like almost like you're asking me to take a journey that I don't have a map for. So I'm not going to go on a trip without a map. Like I need to have an idea of how I'm going to get to this from point A to point B. I love maps. Okay, so if you're asking me to pay attention to something that really does not have relevance as far as I'm concerned, then I'm over here distracted by this right here. Now, what does have relevance to me, because I am a public policy studies major, is how is what is that's happening, what's being said, how will it play out in terms of the programs and the services and the funding that will be available? Because if those tweets or those those newspaper articles or all the commotion is going to the different Senate confirmation hearings and things, if those are going to play out in a way where I know it's going to directly impact the programs and services, especially for what we call the truly disadvantaged, I'm paying attention to that part.
Right.
I need a framework. But in general, in my day-to-day world, because I don't watch a lot of television, I'm practically clueless sometimes because I'm looking at a whole different set of evidence about how we're going to need to put things in place. So what I mean by that, for example, if I know that in the public school system here in Kansas City that we don't have arts programs, my job is not to keep going and fighting with people and telling them we don't have arts programs, give us some money so we can have arts programs. My job is to figure out how to get these arts programs started in a way where you don't have to rely on that system.
I see.
To get them started in a way where they're sustainable. Because sometimes we think we need a lot of money, and sometimes we just need $1,000 to get things off the ground.
Right.
We don't have $1,000, then maybe it's $500. We don't have that, maybe it's $250. The point is to get started where you are, what you have, and not use that kind of crutch of, well, if we had the money, then we could get this done. That's not the point. The point is to get it done. And that's what I mean by thriving. Because if we constantly have as our mindset that the way that we're going to make it is we need $1 million grant in order to have a program. No, we don't need that $1 million grant. What we need is evidence. That's what I mean by research too. Because if I know that you can take $100 and work with 3 kids and help them learn music, that's evidence right there to me. How to put a community-based music program in place and build it from there. Right. And I think that's the other issue. Sometimes we want to start way up here, where we really need to start right here and go on the journey of what's the vision. Right. And that's what I mean by stop just trying to survive and get to thriving. Because when you're thriving, you're working on what you're going to build. You're working on the process of building. Yes. And just like you have Masai wasn't born crawling. He's learning these things. Sometimes he tries before crawling. Right. So it's not linear.
Not at all. Not at all. And I think that's an excellent segue to what I want to ask you next in terms of this process and getting to self-sustainability. And, you know, I think of the old adage of each one teach one, which ultimately leads to organizing, right? And I know that is something that you really specialize in. Talk about the importance of organizing as relates to, again, ultimately achieving the goal of our self-determined, liberated existence. And I think that's something that we need to really look at, because that's a major component of it. I mean, education, you know, organization for our elevation and liberation. So what do you see with that?
Let me start off by saying with that, in terms of organizing, is you start off with information. And most of the time, the best way for people to get information is through word of mouth. So when I was growing up, for example, we didn't have all of this internet, email stuff. You talk to people.
Right.
Whether it was at church, different events, people knew each other. And there were relationships there. You knew who to trust and who not to trust based on their behavior, not based on what they said.
Mm-hmm.
You learn more about what people do than what they say. So that is all giving you information. Information is followed up because when you use it, now you're empowered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't talk enough about the whole empowerment process, because if I'm empowered where I know how to fill out a job application, then I can take a different road than someone who doesn't. So that next stage after empowerment is engagement. Because now, since I'm empowered to complete a job application, I use those skill sets to engage myself. And a lot of times those same skill sets for one thing, they transfer over to something else. So for example, if I know how to complete a job application, now I know how to apply to college, because I know how to complete an application. It might be a completely different application format, but it's the similar process. That same application process will help me when I want to apply for credit. I want to buy a house. I want to do with this. I want to start a business. So that's what I mean by education. Fundamentally, is to help you reach your highest potential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Along the way, there will be obstacles. There will be mountains to move. There will be trials and tribulations. But guess what? If you have that mustard seed, that is still growing inside of you the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have an idea, because of what's been planted in you to fulfill your destiny, of how am I going to reach my highest potential. So you're constantly seeking to reach the light with that. So going back to organizing, when I am working on organizing with people, one of the favorite things that I like to do is I like to go directly into the beauty shops and the barber shops, because you'll find out in the beauty shops and the barber shops that they're having the most intellectual discussions out of everybody.
Right.
And when I worked on the Clinton campaign, I was in St. Louis then, and I decided to take on an initiative of voter registration through the beauty shops and the barber shops.
Okay.
And Faith and Jonathan, they were assisting me. So it was really funny, because we would walk into these places and they would think that if I was in a beauty shop, I was trying to get my hair done or Faith's hair done. I say, no, the reason I'm here is to talk with you all about what's about to happen and how we need to be prepared to be voter. Are you registered to vote? And if in the barbershop, of course, they thought Johnson was going to get a haircut. Well, I did try to get a haircut for him because he was tired of me cutting his hair, so I was able to get some deals.
I know that one.
So I was like, that's perfect. Faith was too young to get her hair done. So anyway, I think that sometimes in sharing information like that, we don't even realize sometimes that we're starting to organize people. Because once you're in those kinds of group settings and you're sharing information about the process, then people are starting to organize and mobilize themselves. Because those kinds of discussions that are going on in those settings, they're starting to talk about, what does that mean if we elect so-and-so and such and such and such and such? And we used to have what our view was a pure system. We didn't have all these pundits that would try to influence the direction of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was much easier to really get at what a candidate brought to the table. Now we get distracted by, scandals and people trying to bring up dirt on each other, just the constant kind of posturing around who's better than who. And it's just, to me, it's just a lot of insanity when you can't really figure out what a person stands for.
Right.
What they can actually get done, because you don't really know their experience or what they can actually bring to the table. So going back to organizing again, if I'm in the community and say I'm at a meeting down at the Federal Reserve Bank and I'm sitting next to someone and we get to talking, just small talk, but we start sharing information. That's another form of organizing.
Hmm.
Because organizing is about relationship building.
Right.
And that's what I mean by going to the barber shops and the beauty shops. The beauty of going into those settings is that there are already a lot of relationships there. And organizing is built off of social capital. And social capital is basically relationships that are based in trust and respect. And when you have social capital, it makes everyone's job a lot easier because people naturally come together to talk with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So organizing becomes a way for us to be a part of the process instead of trying to drive the process. Because I tell people, like, when I have to do workshops or forums with people around different issues, you can either have decisions made by you, for you, or to you.
Mm-hmm.
If decisions are made to you, that is the worst position to be in.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, it's happening because you're not at the table. Now, of course, there are processes where people are not sharing information because it gives them some kind of an advantage not to share it. But when you're a citizen, your responsibility is to be at the table, not to wait until you see things happening and you get so mad and angry and frustrated, and then you try to get in the process, but by then you're bringing all this negative energy with you. And it's difficult to communicate with people when you bring that to the table. Mm-hmm. Okay? So organizing is also hopefully doing some capacity building so that people feel more comfortable.
Okay. So talk about that real quick. What is capacity building? Someone may not know what capacity building is. What is that?
Capacity building is basically, this is what I say sometimes, helping people get to what they say they want to be or where they want to be. So it's not up to me to dictate to someone what they want in life. My job is, if someone says to me, I want to go to college and I want to be a doctor, my job is to say, okay, this is what you're going to need to achieve that goal, and then to help figure out how we get there. So individual capacity building is that process. For me, it was my parents.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't have a mother or a father that can guide me in that, I've got to find someone, and hopefully it's a teacher, because usually next to your parents, an educator or teacher is the one you're spending the most time with. You spend more time at school sometimes than you do at home.
Right. Conscious.
Okay. Right. So when I talk about capacity building, I want to bring up one of my good friends, Andrew Boykin, who we know also is Dinner and Dialogue, the program that he founded. Mm-hmm. I remember talking to Andrew one time a few years ago, and I was very frustrated and stressed out because I was in a work environment that was very stressful. And I remember saying to Andrew, all I want to do is just do my work, is building community capacity. And Andrew is a very thoughtful and reflective listener.
Right.
Much to his credit, he really is an excellent role model and a mentor and a coach for that, because I'm still learning how to be a better listener.
Crucial.
And he listens, and when he responds with love. He's very intentional. And so he said to me, Joanna, this is not about your building community capacity. You need to build your capacity. We were on the phone. I kind of stepped back, like, who does he think he's talking to? But he was telling the truth. And as I started to wrestle with that, like what that meant, and sometimes I talk to Andrew, and he's very compassionate when you're talking with him, and so he's really trying to help you. He's not trying to put you down or do anything but say, hey, this is what I see, and this is how I think you can approach this, right? So as I started to deal with that about my own capacity, I struggled at first because I was so busy trying to help other people that I wasn't working on myself. So that was a real aha moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
That was a light bulb moment for me that I had to have my capacity, my glass had to be full before I could help anyone else reach their highest potential. Because if I was lacking, or a lot of times we get frustrated because we're burned out. And if we don't recognize the signs or the triggers, the warning signs, then we're not going to be of very much use to anyone else. Now, as a mother, I knew that, because when I was working and I would come home, I would sit outside in my car for 15 minutes before I would go inside to my children, because I knew I need to separate myself from what I had just had in my workplace to when I was going inside my home to be a mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to bring that energy, whether it was a good or a bad day, whatever it was. I wanted to completely shut that down and go in and be a full-time mother, which meant that I'm listening to my children talk about their day at school, what they want for dinner, all these different things, right?
Right.
And so having that in-between space and the experience of creating that when I was a mother, that helped me see what Andrew was telling me, because it was like, are you creating these in-between spaces to rest, to relax, to renew? Are you doing things that you like to do? When was the last time you did something creative, Joanna? When was the last time you just hung out? When was the last time you went to your favorite restaurant? When was the last time you just played some music and just danced around all by yourself, just had a good time? When was the last time you got on the phone and called one of your aunties and uncles and just listened to them for a while and caught up with them? So as I began to do that, I realized that I wasn't practicing a very high level of self-care. So my capacity was not where it needed to be in order to be of service in terms of building community capacity. And once I started to embrace that self-care, I learned the power of no. Because I was a people pleaser, not realizing that that's why I was overcommitted, why I was doing so much and not taking care of myself. So when he said that to me, no, Joanna, it's not about building community capacity. You need to build your capacity. I was like, wow. Right? But in my journey, and having a friendship with Andrew, that's been really critical for me, because I need someone who cares enough to say to me what needs to be said in that moment.
Right, right.
And he's a part of my journey towards reaching my highest potential.
Each one teach one.
Exactly. So what you just said is so important, because sometimes we may not even realize how we're impacting someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like, also my grandmother, she passed away last year, but she used to always say, give me my flowers before I leave here. I don't need them. You all crying and
right. What good is it in?
I want them now, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think about that in terms of the people who are in my life, that are in my inner circle, that's the relationship that we have. Give me my flowers now. And that's how I see Andrew. He's one of those. He's not trying to wait until you leave and say, I should have told her this. I should have said this. He's in a position where he's built his capacity enough to say, I'm going to talk with her about this right now.
Right.
Now, Andrew is, he's probably going to maybe not quite like me saying this about him, but I'm just going to have to share it. I called Andrew one time, and I was telling him about something I was going through, and not even knowing he was on vacation.
Wow.
So I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry you're on vacation. He's like, Joanna, it's not a problem. We can talk about this. And so I think about people like that who along the way have been an example of what it really means to be in someone's life and to show up and to be present and to have a meaningful presence in a person's life. Because he could have not answered his phone if he saw the caller ID, or he could have done a lot of different things, but he chose to answer the phone. He chose to be present. So going back to organizing, those are the kinds of relationships that help us do organizing. I was talking to one of my elder friends one day, and we were talking about how there was so much commotion in this country and people being stressed out, and her experience in the civil rights movement. And one of the things that she said that really stuck with me, she said, well, I can't get out here like the young people and do what they're doing, marching and all that. But I remember when there were people when I was involved in the civil rights movement growing up, and they had the pot of black eyed peas and cornbread. Because the marchers, they weren't cooking meals, so someone had to cook. And what it made me think about was how we don't even realize sometimes how everyone has a part to play.
Right.
And that's that capacity building, that's that organized. Because if there weren't the people who had the pot of black eyed peas, then
who was eating?
Right. Who was making sure that people had a place to sleep and water and some food to nourish them, etc. So we need to really think about that, and that's one of the reasons why I am such a strong proponent of asset-based community development, because it brings those kinds of things in. When you're doing that kind of work, grassroots organizing in particular, you really need to start appreciating people for who they are and what they really contribute, and not kind of minimize that and act like it's because of $1 million or because they have a degree or because they come from west of truths instead of east of truths. We tend to use all this stuff to box ourselves in, and then we wonder why we can't quite get along.
Yeah. Those are the challenges of human nature as far as uniting that. Now, speaking of organizing an organization, what types of activities are you currently engaged in now? What is going on with Joanna Farmer now? What is on the horizon for you as far as, the projects that you have coming up and things of that nature, your engagements? And how is it related to the liberation of our community, of our people?
Is that a trick question?
It's kind of leading. It's a leading question because we've had some conversations.
Because we're Facebook friends, so you get to see what I'm up to.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
No, when I came here in 2001, I had moved from the eastern side of the state. I worked in St. Louis. And so the only thing I really knew about the state of Missouri was what I had read about in the history books. I knew about the Dred Scott decision. I knew about the Emancipation Proclamation and Missouri's role in that. I knew about Lewis and Clark. So, and we know about the Mississippi River and all of that, right?
Right.
So when I came to this state, having lived in other parts of the country, and also having members of my family who lived in different parts of the world and just having discussions, it was really an eye-opener for me when I came here, because I grew up in a city where there was segregation, but I didn't grow up in a city where there was also such a legacy of enslavement. And my journey in terms of understanding Missouri became much bigger than what I could have ever imagined. And so when I came here and I started the jobs that I was doing, working in compliance and transportation and education, running programs and things like that, I really got to understand what it meant to have significant history-changing decisions like Dred Scott. So St. Louis is a really interesting place because there's just so much history in this state. And so I started to really want to understand, and I started developing Black history curriculum. And so by the time I came here to Kansas City in 2001, I had a better understanding of the state of Missouri and the legacy that was here. But it was when I came to Kansas City that it really started to play out. When I was in St. Louis, I remember when people were taking me out to lunch for my farewell and all of that, and they would say to me, "You're going to hate it in Kansas City."
Wow.
I'd be like, "What?" And I'm saying to myself, I hate it here. So
right.
about? So, because I'm thinking, what's this whole thing about? Like, I didn't understand the rivalry, So we be joking around about that, like, you're going to have a big adjustment and thing. I'd be like, well, I had a big adjustment here, kind of thing. But they were right. And it wasn't that I hated it, but it was really different. And I started to understand why, because of the whole westward expansion, right?
Right.
So the people that I met here, it was clear to me that there were definitely some challenges around people being engaged in the process for one reason or another. And I learned from my experience in St. Louis that the racism was really intense. And how I negotiated that sometimes was because I'm from this West Side of Chicago thing and I'm going to speak up, I had to really understand how to negotiate that. So by the time I got here, I was more prepared, but it was still different because Kansas City is just a very special place. And it's got so many different stories that need to be brought forward, and it's got such a special history, her story, our story that still needs to be told. And I've met so many incredible people here in Kansas City that I've watched their evolution as they built programs and initiatives and projects and businesses. And I've seen the evolution of public policy in Kansas City, whether it be through the school system, through employment, through housing, development, economic development. So by the time I got to Kansas City, I was deciding that also that I really needed to understand more about how education influenced community development, because I've been in community development by then for a pretty long time. So I'll confess, because not everyone knows, but I've been confessing this lately. I've been in 3 PhD programs. And part of the reason is because as soon as I start having challenges with my data, I'm like, okay, I'm out of here, because I'm not going to fight about my data because this is culturally competent data kind of thing. We can go into that another time. So by the time I got to Kansas City,
let me ask you this: the challenge you had was from dealing with the faculty. You were having a challenge for them accepting the data that you were presenting.
Right, because if you come into a PhD program, you write documents as part of your application process.
Right.
So people basically know what you're going to study. Now, if I come into a program and I'm studying culturally competent mental health care or culturally competent and relevant education materials,
right,
and then I start to interact with people who question that very thing that is in my application process, my thing is, why are you questioning me, and how can we get through this? Because I'm creating original data. I'm not going and getting some data that's an example. I've been major research projects and know how to collect original data. I know how to go out and talk to people, and I'm not afraid to go into the community and really find out from the community what's going on. I'm not sitting somewhere trying to figure it out from reading some document
or
talking to
textbook.
people, like real people. And I've even been in situations where I was told I could not go into the community and do my research. And I'm looking at the person like, either you're crazy or I'm stupid, or vice versa.
That's crazy.
Because that's just not how it's going to be. So by the time I got to Kansas City, I had been through some challenges, some changes in academia, and I was in a PhD program actually at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and that folded because of the lack of funding. But I started to realize that just going down that route really wasn't for me anyway. There was a reason that wasn't working out, and it was really incumbent upon me to just really start focusing on Indigenous community residents, because that's really what I was doing in the first place. So I had been in the program development arena so long that I kept realizing that I was developing programs, but I wasn't getting to know the people like I needed to. And so the staff that I'll be working with, our team, they would have that day-to-day frontline contact, but as a director and all these other different titles was over here doing something else. And so I decided I wanted to get into education because I knew I was functioning at the macro level, but I needed to function at the micro level. So, think that once we start going back to what we were talking about earlier, once we start to connect the micro and the macro, we're really going to start to see some changes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because right now, if you don't have access to the macro, then you don't really know what to do with the micro sometimes.
Okay. Now, what dimension is that you're referring to, the macro and the micro? I mean, is this dealing with organization? Is this dealing with universal? You know, what particular plane are you making this reference about the macro and the micro?
So if you don't understand how dollars come through the federal and the state government, for example, okay, and are implemented at the state, the city, or the local level, and you're relying on your representatives, your politicians to tell you that, then there's a space in between what you know and what's happening. Okay. And we have different decisions that have been made, for example, in Kansas City, with different corporations coming to Kansas City, where there have been tax deals, for example. And sometimes we're not really aware of what those tax deals mean to us. So, for example, if a corporation gets a tax deal, then that means someone's got to pay the taxes and then fall on the individuals. So that's what I mean. There's something happening at the macro level, but it's going to impact the people at the micro level. So how do we close that space so that people can become more informed and empowered and engaged in that process? And I think we're starting to find better ways to help people. There's a lot going on right now around capacity building, all different types of organizations and agencies that I'm seeing doing this work. But we still have to figure out a way to really equip people. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Missouri, because of the educational system, people are basically receiving what Dr. Carter G. Woodson talked about and don't know our story, for example. So when you don't know your own story, you don't know yourself that well. And at some point we've got to get to where it's just as easy for Joanna Farmer to talk to a mayor as it is for a city council person to talk to a mayor. Mm-hmm. And I think we're getting closer to that. And I really admire and respect Sly James, our mayor, because he really does his best to be in the community. And I've seen him participate in forums in different venues. And what I've witnessed is that he is constantly making sure that he's serving the residents of Kansas City. And so I think that when you have a mayor like that with that kind of leadership, then the residents of Kansas City have to be more engaged in that relationship.
Right. I see what you're saying.
So that's what I mean by the micro and the macro, because if I sit back as a citizen and what I mostly do is complain about what I see and think that it's just due to racism or it's just due to this, instead of saying, well, how am I engaged? Do I know my neighbors? Do I go to school board meetings? Do I show up at my child's school? Am I volunteering somewhere to help out? Because if we just think that we can come home and just watch what's on television on Thursday nights.
Right, that's not going to get done.
And then we're upset because we see things happening where we don't think it's fair. We can't complain the same way as someone who's actively engaged and who's putting in the sweat equity to be a part of the change we need to see. And so when we talk about the micro and the macro and bringing those two things closer and closer, people have to not see the president as the one who solves the problems.
Ooh, that's problematic. We
solve the problems. We help whomever is higher in these higher positions understand how we're going to be a part of solving the problem.
Right. Grassroots. I mean, that's always been the resolution to our people's solutions, our issues. If we're waiting on the top to come down, that's never going to get anything done. So, I mean, that's huge. So with that, what types of engagements are you involved in? Given this here.
I'm going to go directly to that because you asked me that question. Now,
yes, ma'am.
Now, I've worked kinds of areas, on different projects. And because of all of those different experiences, I keep coming back to the same thing. My heart is with children. And I made a declaration to myself that moving forward, anything I work on has to directly impact children positively. Okay. So the projects I'm working on right now are I'm mentoring in the Hickman Middle School District. So that means a lot to me. Those 2 days, I look forward to that. And the different committees that I serve on in South Kansas City, and then I'm a member of the Alliance for Economic Inclusion. All of that has to come back to how does that impact children? Mm-hmm. And I'm openly stating that when people approach me about participating in something, I'm discussing with them, okay, how can we create a win-win? How is this going to help you do what you want to do and help me do what I want to do? How can we come together? So there are things I'm doing right here in Kansas City, and then there's some things that are at a higher level than Kansas City. By that I mean higher, not in better, but some things that are happening at the national and the global level that directly impact children. So one of the things that we have in Kansas City now that originated out of LA is something called the Encounter. And the Encounter is a group of people, it's very eclectic, come from all different walks of life, who basically come together to solve problems. We don't talk about problems, we come together to talk about solutions and to figure things out. So that's another process that I'm supporting. I call myself a member of the support team, really, because I can only be on the front in so many different things. And we need to be better also in terms of capacity building about supporting people, about embracing that team leadership model, so that we all know that if Michael can't be there that day, the meeting still happens. Someone else there knows how to step in and pick up so things can continue to move forward. Because sometimes we get caught up in meeting too. We just think we're going to meet, and then next time we meet, we're going to decide on the next meeting. And we need to get to this point where we're actually working in the meetings and then taking on assignments. And when we come back, we're talking about the progress that we've made with that assignment. So the projects I'm working on in terms of professionally, that's that. Then personally, my biggest task right now is my son is getting married in April. So I have to work on that, of course. And then my family's genealogy. Those are the other things that I'm working on.
Awesome. How's the genealogy? And I know the marriage is huge too, but just curious as far as with the genealogy, because that's something that you've been really coming across a lot lately, as far as on television and people doing their swab to see what their DNA is and what their continental roots are. So how is that coming along for you?
Well, that's another advantage of being in Kansas City. So let me give a plug right now to MAGIC, the Midwest Afro-American Genealogical Interest Coalition, because we have a tremendous resource in that organization being right here. Mm-hmm. We also have a tremendous resource because a major genealogical library is right here. It's in Independence, Missouri. So it's really interesting that people are being are wanting to do more to find out about their story, because we're at a moment in time now, because of the technology, where you can go online and pull up your census record and it's cross-indexed. So before, I would have to sit and do things that would take hours to find records, whereas now it will take you 10 minutes to find 10 family members with one census record. So that's huge, because it moves things farther. In terms of the genealogy, the DNA testing, on my mother's side, we had that done back in 2008. And so I've been involved with that for a while, too, in terms of figuring out who my genetic cousins are. And it's kind of interesting, because when I was in Australia last year visiting my son, I actually found out that we have some genetic cousins there. And, we know that we're related to each other, because we all come from one source.
Right, ultimately, right.
To actually start to piece some things together like that is really interesting, because it takes you to a whole nother level in terms of, who you are and who you're related to and what the possibilities are. There's some incredible databases out here too now where you can just do a surname search and even find out the frequency of your surname globally.
Really?
Which helps you do things that you might not have been able to do because it was difficult to access that kind of information.
Right.
Now, in terms of genealogy, we also have records like this Freedmen's Bureau, the bank coming online. And so we have people that are volunteering to actually transcribe those records, digitize them so that people can have access to those. So my genealogy experience, my journey has been going on for a while now, and I have a lot of information. I really need to start cataloging it, and I'm doing my best to get some of my younger family members to step in and be a part of the team. And so genealogy is something that it's ongoing. People who write books, they write what they know at that time, but there's always something else happening where you can write another book, write an article. You can even become certified as a genealogist to help other people. So the beauty of genealogy is going back to education. Genealogy helps you understand who you are.
Right.
So that whole thing about educational being fundamental and foundational. I remember the first time I looked at a census record and I found out that my grandma, Mitty, was a school teacher. It was listed right there in the census record. And I had heard that because the first thing you should do as a genealogist is the oral history. I had heard that when I was doing the oral history, but to see it documented, I was like, wow, they documented that. And so those kinds of experiences helped me see that for as much as I like to think that I just naturally love education, there's something in my genes here.
Right, in your blood, yep.
That's being transferred. And when we had our last family reunion, I had to give an update on our genealogy. And so I was telling my family that sometimes we think that the habits that we have are just our habits, not even realizing that those habits are being passed down through generations. For example, the love of reading. On both sides of the family, my grandparents both loved books. Okay. So just being surrounded by this all the time. They also, art that was African-based, those kinds of things. And so you don't even realize that you're carrying these things forward. And genealogy is a way to really document that and say, instead of just, kind of having the stories, start having these stories written down about how Auntie Myra did X, Y, and Z that help you understand X, Y, and Z, how to get a better job kind of thing, because she had that experience, right? So instead of it just being an oral history, now it's documented so that my children and their children and their children know about Auntie Myra.
That's deep. So, because we're getting close to like a half hour left of this show, I want to close with some of your reflections, being a Chicago native, in light of that, and seeing the decimation that our community, and it's not just Chicago, of course, this is a national, international tragedy that you're seeing people of African ancestry under attack, whether it be internally or externally. I mean, how do you assess this, and how can we address it, rectify it, and move forward, and particularly under this new Trump administration and some of the things that are going to take place, that are projected to take place, even with the housing, public policy. We're seeing a lot of the civil rights efforts of the past century almost being halted, So what do you see we as African Americans need to do in light of this, as it relates to being educated, as it relates to being organized, as it relates to becoming more self-determined? How can we go about accomplishing said matters in such a hostile and, overtly racist environment? Not that it's new, but it's become more sophisticated. So how do we move forward in light of that?
For me, first I want to say that if this is not about Donald Trump.
Thank you.
this is not about Donald Trump. I think that that's where a lot of people are stuck right now. And I'm a little, like I said, I'm a little bit more detached because I don't watch television. I'm not as easily influenced by the media. Okay, the propaganda.
Right.
And when I step back from this whole thing, I remember that the greatest legacy that we have is the love that was shared from one generation to the next, because how would we be here today had not that type of energy sustained us? And that through every single horror that we experience, that we know is steadily being documented, the inhumanity of what we experienced as a people, we still found the courage to live. And to, even if you're shackled, to still your mind is free. And you know that there's going to be a better day. So we've been in this experience for a long time now. And I believe that because of that love and because of faith, we have an understanding spiritually that our job is to be good people. I'm so grateful to my father, because every time I would leave the house, he would always say, be good. There were a couple times I wanted to turn around and say, how can you tell me to be good when you're not always good, kind of thing. But, it's just being stubborn. And But I started to understand that what he was doing was he was preparing me to go into the world and be a good person, literally. Because it would be so easy to be triggered by different things. And some of this stuff that we're seeing with the constant violence, it's a lack of love.
Man, simple.
And not just for the other person that you're attacking, that you're treating inhumanely, it's a reflection of yourself. It's coming out of a deficit. And it's unfortunate that we have these kinds of things going on still. Here we are in the year 2017, and we're still seeing some things that are just, it's really not even for me to explain. I have to really lean on my faith during times like this. So I want to go into asset-based community development because that's one of the main reasons I wanted to come on the podcast. We really have to start seeing ourselves for who we really are. And one of the most important strengths that we have is our ability to show up. What I mean by that is if I wake up, and they used to call, wake up on the right side of the bed, or if you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, kind of thing. So we have a decision when we first wake up to say, okay, either I'm going to be a part of the process and be the change we need to see, or I'm going to be one of those kind of people that just kind of slugs along, just go along, and I get upset when something doesn't go my way, whatever. And asset-based community development really allows us to focus on how can we educate, elevate, and liberate. Because we get to look around at the things that we have that are already in existence, that are really resources for us. And those assets are citizens, associations, institutions, land, and economy. So with every single one of those, they also work together. And when we talk about our people and where we're going, where we've been, that's Sankofa, where we're going, because we can fetch what we need, we have to put ourselves in a position where we start to do the right thing so that it doesn't matter who's the president. We're doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I really respect people like Chief Forte because I don't know if I could do that job. And I grew up watching violence, in Chicago. So we need to start supporting each other more and disrespecting each other less, calling each other out, because that's a form of violence too. Creating that kind of energy, that's a form of violence, and we need to really talk about what we say, because words have energy, words have power.
Man, yes they do.
And we create situations because of the negativity that we use, what we say, and even what we think, what we feel, because it comes out of you once you start putting out that kind of energy. So I really, as I'm moving forward, when you ask me about the projects, my projects are really framed now around asset-based community development. And I was exposed to this when I was working at Shore Bank in Chicago. And so I've seen the power of asset-based community development, and it's used globally. And when people start to recognize that the greatest asset is us, we the people, we the citizens, we are really the ones that drive change. So it really does start in your heart, mind, and spirit. It really does start in your home. It really does start with how you show up in the world. Right. How are you treating people? Are you smiling at people? Are you frowning at people? Are you being nice to people? Are you being mean to people? Are you being giving, or are you just a taker? Are you being a user? Are you helping people?
Right.
So we have to recreate community. And community is based off healthy children and families. So once we start dealing with the fact that we are responsible for the experiences that our children are having, how can we create a future if we're neglecting our children?
Nothing.
And it's not about just my two children, because I want my children to have peers that they can relate to. So if I don't do my part and help out other children, then I'm just like saying, oh, well, it's just all about me, and as long as I got mine, it's okay. We really are our brother and sister's keeper. And when we decide to take ownership of that responsibility, we're going to see some change. And we can already see change where people are doing that, and you see change. And for as much as we hear about all the negativity, all of the killing, all of the violence, all of the wrong things, we tend to focus on that more than we focus on the good things, the right things, the blessings. And we, once again, going back to, where do you put your attention? Put your attention on the latest tweet, or do you put your attention on looking at the sunrise in the morning? Where you put your attention is where you put your energy. And you're soaking up vibrations based on what you choose to spend your time thinking about. So I'm a realistic optimist, because I know day to day things happen. I get upset about things too, but am I going to let that drive what I know to be true, which is that really and truly, when good people come together and work together, there are all kinds of possibilities for what can be different, for what can be better. So for me, that involves working with children and making sure that they know that we've got their back, that they're safe, that we're responsible adults. And I think that once we start to use the tools of asset-based community development, we're going to start looking around ourselves and saying, did I take my child to the zoo, or did I pick up a couple of kids that I know may not have an opportunity? Did I take them to the zoo? Or did I help out a youth group? Maybe I couldn't volunteer, but did they need $10 to pay for one child? Did I do that? Did I have the $10? Because we have to practice more giving and less talking.
I agree.
We have to practice more doing and less waiting. Because we keep talking about, we have to do X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, we have to do X, Y, and Z, and then talk about, And sometimes I bump heads with people because I'm one of those, if I see something, let me take care of it. Now, I'm not that great at that anymore in my housework, because I'm just like, oh, well, I guess get to that later. I'm going to have some things to do. But in terms of, being out here, and I used to have on my voicemail that I was out slaying dragons, catching butterflies, and changing the world. Because that's how I felt sometimes. So having children will make you get a clue, because you can't bring all that garbage into their lives. Not if you're going to be a responsible parent, right? So there's just going to have to be some changes among us, Michael. That's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
We can't keep externalizing to, well, if they wouldn't do this, then we wouldn't have that. No, what do we need to do to have this something that we want to have? When are we going to choose to be excellent?
Mm-hmm.
We have to raise our standards.
Mm-hmm.
Because you'll either rise or lower to the standards. So instead of talking about who's sagging pants, what are we doing? Kids aren't born sagging pants. Somehow or another, there's something's going on here where children are reacting and rebelling in some kind of way. So it's not, we need to stop all this judging and blaming and criticizing. And it's hard because change is tough, but change is necessary too.
Very much so.
And now we find ourselves in a situation where, yes, potentially a lot of things could be cut, but the other side of crisis is opportunity.
Yes.
So what are we going to do so that someone has that pot of black-eyed peas ready while the other person is over there marching and doing what they feel is the right thing to do to be actively engaged? We have control over how we treat other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We don't have to be mean and ugly and nasty, even if that's what's represented in front of us. And I know some people don't like President Obama, and that's okay because I don't expect us all to agree. And sometimes we just have to learn to agree to disagree. And I'm not specifically talking about him, but I want to talk about Mrs. Obama, Michelle Obama, and what she represents. As a woman, I think she has really shown the level of excellence around children that we need to see. And as a people, we have a strong legacy of how we treat our children as gifts, as blessings. And we've been getting away from that for a very long time now, almost letting them just kind of fend on their own, like you go figure it out kind of thing. And when I say we, I mean we have to embrace this as a collective. And I say, well, my kids are okay, because for as many people that benefited from having a great education and being able to leave the so-called ghetto, the ones that you left behind, now that's mushroomed into something.
Yeah.
So how are we going to tackle that? Either we're going to decide that I really need to give an hour of my time to do whatever this hour of your time is. And something touched my heart so deeply last week because I have a fourth grader and a fifth grader, they're sisters. And the fourth grader, she came down first, and she was telling me that her classmates, they get jealous of her. And I asked her, well, why would they get jealous? And she said, well, they just don't like that I get to leave the classroom. And I said, well, why would that make them jealous? And she said, because I'm the only one that has a mentor.
Wow.
So I turned to her and I said, that makes me very sad. You're the only one that has a mentor in your whole class? And she said, yes, Miss Farmer. And I left that day just saying to myself, what is wrong that she is the only one in her class that has a mentor? There's something fundamentally wrong with the people that would call out everybody else but themselves. And that's what I mean by Michelle Obama. To me, she worked tirelessly showing us a way forward of how to interact with our children, how to support our children. She didn't just support her two. Right. She was going around the world supporting children. So we're going to have to really own up and take responsibility in order for us to see the change we want to see. And I just think it's just happening, because it's not just happening. There's some energy behind why it's happening. And some of it is because we're not taking responsibility. And some people may not like what I have to say about that, but that's what I will stand on, because I know that when we are engaged, that there's a different outcome.
It's our responsibility. I mean, there's no other way around that solely. If we're leaving it to someone else, then, like Malcolm said, we're fools. If we let someone else educate our children and do what else is required of us to have a successful future, I mean, we're turning over our life to their hands.
I was doing an inventory today, actually, because we have so many museums here where there is no admission price. Public transportation, when I first came here, it was just like, it would take me 2 hours to get somewhere. It would take me 20 minutes in my car. Those barriers are less now. We don't have as many obstacles in terms of that. So people are going to have to start doing what it takes to use the resources that we have to open the horizons and not kind of get stuck on everything's wrong east of truth. It's not just the disinvestment, it's the disengagement that we have to deal with. So that's really it. I'm focusing, like I said, on asset-based community development. I'm doing my best to share the information with people, and some people, they take it and run with it and they start using it. Some people just kind of let it sit on a shelf somewhere. But my purpose is really to start encouraging, motivating, and being a part of projects where people can use these kinds of practices to create the change that we need, to be the change that we need.
That's crucial. That's crucial. So, if someone was interested in getting in contact with you and collaborating with some of your efforts, or maybe getting your expertise, how would they go about getting in contact with Joanna Farmer?
Before I answer that question, I'm going to explain the difference between assets and deficits, okay?
No doubt. Please do.
Deficit thinking is problem-orientated. It's about how to fix this problem. Someone needs to sort this. It's an us versus them. Problems are embedded. We do things to people. People are a problem. People can't be trusted to decide or be in control. When you have an asset thinking mindset, it's strengths-based. It's about how can we create community spirit? What can I do? We're all in this together. We're getting there. You work with engaged people. Understand that people have the answers and that people control their lives. So John McKnight, who is one of the co-founders of asset-based development, there's actually an asset-based institute out of Northwestern University in Chicago, in Evanston, Illinois. I'm going to give you this quote. Every single person has skills, abilities, and gifts. What are yours? So we all have within us, we were born geniuses. And we all have time, talents, and treasures. It's up to us to decide how we want to use them. So basically with the work that Building Community Capacity does, it's based on collaborations and partnerships. It would be foolish of me to move my organization in a direction where I think I can do it all by myself, because it's just not true. No, not one of us has all the answers. We need to talk to each other. We need to work together. We need to learn how to agree to disagree. We need to know how to focus on a common vision, a shared vision, and get to the place where we can work on some concrete goals and solve some problems. So the best way to get in touch with me is through my email address, which is legacyoflove.global@gmail.com. That's LEGACYOFLOVE.global, GLOBAL, And when you contact me, please tell me how we can work together. Let me know so we can start a discussion based on that. And we want to move from the needs base of what's not there and what services we need and treating people as consumers, and that programs are the answers, because we've been doing that for a long time now. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So it's really time for a new way forward. There's some people that I know already who do understand asset-based community development. They've been in training for it already. Okay. So the assets are what is there, what are the connections and contributions, who are the citizens who are working on that, and understand that people ultimately are the answer. So it's really about people power. It's about a shared economy. It's about a collaborative economy. It's about all of the things that we can do to create healthy, safe, nurturing, viable, thriving communities. It's about creating the we instead of me.
Okay.
It's about focusing on us instead of I.
That's beautiful.
Because really and truly, we're all in this together.
Right. Before we go, and we spoke about this the other night, the Nguzo Saba principles and how that relates to what it is you're doing. What do you, and it may be a larger group of individuals involved in the effort, but what is it that you have sought to do with the Nguzo Saba principles of Kwanzaa?
Basically, the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, the Nguzo Saba, can be used as practices for your daily life. And the beautiful thing about those 7 principles is that they really can be used as a framework, foundation, and a structure. And so the one that I'm primarily using right now is JIMA, which means collective work and responsibility. And so when we start to focus on that, what happens in South Kansas City is connected to what happens east of Truce. And that it's really up to all of us. Because I try to tell people that, we try to separate ourselves by neighborhoods, but that's artificial. Because ultimately we all live in Kansas. You don't write on your address as, I live in Brookside, Kansas City. You have to write Kansas City, Missouri in your zip code. And that zip code will tell people what that neighborhood could be. But we're not writing east of Truce, Missouri. So we need to start understanding that there's a much bigger picture here, that all of Kansas City is benefiting or not, depending on what is happening or not happening in another part of the city. Right. Now, to make that even bigger is that we're a bi-state region. So we need to start communicating better with our brothers and sisters over in Wyandotte County, for example. And then we have the state line. So how do we start creating more community building rather than saying, well, you live over there in Leawood and I live over here in South Kansas City. So we've just got to start embracing the mindset of this unified global type way of thinking and being and working together, because all of that is a part of asset-based community development. So I think the main thing right now is for the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles, to be used as an organizing tool to help us start about how can a principle be used, like umoja, which is unity. How can that be used in a meaningful way to actually establish what we would call unity? And some people's definitions may be different, because the choir at church, because they're all singing together, they have unity. The children in the classroom, because they're all in the same classroom together, they have unity. But then it becomes, how do these different things relate and connect to each other? How do they overlap? Because when we start to see those connections and how they relate to each other and how they overlap, that's when we see the synergy. And the beautiful thing about seeing those connections and how they overlap is that we can start to leverage resources, because what you put into the pot is just as important as what I put into the pot. And together we have a beautiful meal. So if we have a buffet, we don't want everyone to bring the meat dish. Right. Say, well, you bring dessert, and you bring the salad, and you bring the bread, and you bring the this, and you bring the that. So we're creating a buffet that's bountiful, that's a big harvest for all of it. That's why the whole thing around agriculture, the urban farming, is so important, because it's really creating community again.
It is. Yes, it is.
It's bringing people together around a shared purpose, which is to have healthy, nutritious, non-GMO food. And it's a great way to build community, because you're actually working on a project together.
Yeah.
And everybody, you kind of decide, well, I don't really like to get my hands dirty, but I do like to water the plants, or I like to build, or I like to do whatever. And then sometimes people say, well, I don't know how to do that, so I want to go over here and work on that team and do that. So there's a way to continue to build capacity all throughout a process like that. And so those kinds of opportunities are valuable, and we need to start seeing if we can support the ones that are working and ongoing, and then help create more opportunities like that. We have a lot of great examples in Kansas City, so we're really blessed all the way around with all of this, because we have so many great people who are putting in the time and energy and effort to move things forward and be an excellent example, role model, and they're really lighting the way and encouraging other people to get involved as well. So they're organized. We might not see it as organizing, but they really are organizing right in front of us.
Very much so. I interviewed Dre Taylor a few weeks ago. I interviewed Elder Maurice Copeland just last week. I got some future people I'm going to be interviewing. International, Mama C, I'm going to be bringing her on the show towards the end of the month. And just, really look to generate this, and get this voice unified and harmonized and connect these dots. Because, the diaspora, we talked about this the other night. We got to really find ways to build solidarity amongst the diaspora. And I know you even spoke about you have some things that you're doing with people in Africa as well, and how that's all moving forward. So, it's just so much that we have before us with the opportunities you talked about in this time of crisis, because we can't deny that there is a crisis before us, but the opportunities are just as great as the crisis is. So
but see, my biggest takeaway from that is that crisis has never disappeared. So we treat things like it's the latest crisis, where crisis was always there somewhere or another. Sometimes things are magnified because of social media, and I'm not taking away from the importance of it and acknowledging that it is a problem, that it is a crisis. But we also need to keep it in perspective, because we keep magnifying it to the extent that it's delaying our ability to get things done.
Right.
Because we're stopping and saying, let's focus on this crisis right now. But in the meantime, the rest of the world's still moving on. People still getting up, going to work, doing different things. So how can we continue to move even while acknowledging that there's a crisis? And not get stuck in the crisis.
Very much so. So we're wrapping up with this 8 o'clock hour, Sister Farmer. Is there any last final parting thoughts that you want to share with the listening audience?
There's my friend Masai, one of the most important people in my world. Hi, Masai. Masai is a wonderful 4-year-old who I'm blessed to know. Hi, Masai. I worked with his father, one of my favorite people, in Upward Bound at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where I was working with first-generation college students and creating the social science curriculum over there. And so to see Masai and his mother, Sunny Long, who is also an incredibly beautiful person and doing great things in our community by being a breastfeeding activist as well as a nutrition activist, and she's also now using Facebook as a medium to help people understand how to create curriculum for their children if you want to homeschool, and even if you're not technically homeschooled, you just want some curriculum to supplement what your children are doing academically. You want to have these different experiences. So I just want to leave with, truly, the children are the future. That's just the truth. And once we start to put our energy into the right direction, just like Andrew told me, being a good friend, you need to build your capacity. So we need to take care of ourselves. We need to really nurture ourselves. We're in a mental health crisis also, which we're not really dealing with, talking about. So taking care of ourselves will help us be better to ourselves and to each other. And we have to practice the golden rule, because the children are watching us
closely.
We are their examples. They look up to us as to how they should be behaving. So we have a unique opportunity in this crisis to get to some fundamentals of what it really means to be a citizen, to live in this world. Because we're not just citizens of the United States, we're citizens of the world. So I just want to close with thanking everyone and thanking you especially, Michael, for providing this forum. I'm hoping that we can have some more discussions like this around asset-based community development. There's some people that I'd like to bring on as well.
Indeed.
That are actually practicing it and doing some very important work and getting some good outcomes from it. So, just love. That's the elixir.
Most powerful force there is. Yes, indeed.
And I can't say it any better than when I see a child, that's the most pure form of love that I ever experience, because they are not jaded or, by becoming an adult. So they're still just kids.
That's beautiful.
So I'm going to be Joanna Grace Farmer, and you keep right on being who you are, my brother, and keep on changing things around here in Kansas City, and let's keep right on educating and elevating and liberating. I appreciate you so much for everything that you do to make a difference and bring us close together.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, I want to thank you for taking the time out to be our guest in a feature for this evening and sharing your wonderful perspectives and your experiences with us. And I'm sure many of the listeners are definitely going to be edified and enlightened by what you presented. I know I was, just really, just synthesizing it all. And that's the most important thing, that we can really get a synthesis out of this and understand how to better move forward. So again, thank you. I do have some of the people. I spoke with a brother, I believe it's Joseph, today.
Oh, yes.
And so we're going to, in the future, work on getting him onto the show and talking about some of his efforts that he has going on in Michigan. He is?
Yes, Saginaw, Michigan.
Yeah, so we'll get him on the show in the near future. Maybe as soon as next month. I have some already lined up for this month. So we're looking probably for maybe next month to get him on the show as soon as possible. Maybe if you want to come on and enhance, because he said you're a major part of what he's doing in Michigan. So we may have a little of you on again to just supplement what he's bringing. But I definitely want to feature him and what he has going on in Saginaw, Michigan. And just really make these connections with these people so we can understand what is going on in our diaspora, what is going on the continent. Because like I said, with Mama C coming up, we're going to see what's going on in Tanzania. I've already interviewed some people in the northeastern country of Israel, which is Africa. People don't understand that. So, we're just making these connections with Hebrew Vision Live and just really looking into the heart of the African diaspora and making sure our people are having their voices heard, most importantly.
Exactly.
Yes, indeed. So thank you again, Sister Joanna. We're going to wrap up and just get ready for our next presentation next week with a brother out of Wichita. And he's going to be talking about The World is Your Canvas. He's an artist. He's actually my cousin. And he does a lot of positive work in Wichita as well. And has some very insightful views that I think, the world needs to hear as well. So that's what we got going on.
Well, thank you so much, and let's keep on bringing power to the people.
Power to the people, yes, indeed. You have a good evening, Sister Joanna.
You too.
Thank you.
All right, peace.
Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings.
And so you have just heard a live interview with Sister Joanna Grace Farmer, who is a very dynamic woman in the Kansas City area and has done much for our people. And so as we open, we will close as well with the song Let My People Go. I want to thank all the listeners for tuning in to Hebrew Vision Live this evening. Tune in next week, as I had just mentioned, same time, 6 to 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, every Yom Hamashi or every Thursday evening, where Hebrew Vision Live brings to you the word of the Most High and also the activities of the people. So here we go. Let My People Go, featuring Nehemiah, Yaleach, and Mikhail Korban Yahu by Nakia Bat Yahuda. Here we go.